In the summer of 1941, Nazi Germany's military intelligence service, the Abwehr, sent a coded message to their master spy on the British Isles.
In the name of the Führer, you have been awarded the Iron Cross, first and second class. Our thoughts are with you.
What the Germans didn't know was that their leading agent operated under the control of MI5, Britain's counter-espionage service. It was part of the double-cross system, an elaborate British deception scheme against the Nazis. It was an intelligence operation that helped change the course of the Second World War.
One of the lessons one learns in putting over a deception plan is not to explain it to the Germans, not to detail it, but to give them a mass of information from apparently different sources, which enables them to put the jigsaw puzzle together and draw their own conclusions.
Though MI5 has always been eager to guard its secrets, it has now released some key documents on the double-cross system. And for the first time on television, many former members of MI5 talk about their wartime experiences.
I'm being asked to spill the beans, so to speak. It's still a sort of slight hurdle to get over, to chatter away like this, without any inhibitions.
In September 1940, Britain was invaded. That autumn, more than 24 German spies arrived on the British Isles, either by boats released from German submarines, by parachute, or as refugees. Their mission was to spy on British defences. But this wasn't the Britain they had expected. Much of the coastline was under close patrol. Within days or even hours, most of the spies were rounded up and taken to a highly secret interrogation centre in the southwest of London, known as Camp 020, and run by MI5.
He would be driven in, and he would be taken to a cell. There he would be stripped. Everything that he wore, all his possessions taken away. And he was very rigorously searched, a very strict body search, and all his clothes were taken away and mostly, as they say, tested to destruction. The idea being to look for any secret messages or secret ink or what have you.
Now, the man who was in charge at 020, we called him Tin Eye. He looked like a caricature of a German officer from the First World War. And he was really terrifying to look at. You'd frighten the daylights out of anybody.
The spies were taken from their cells to the interrogation room.
The prisoner was brought in and made to stand in front of the table facing the colonel. And the colonel said, "What's your name?" And he said, "How old are you? What's your address? Where do you live? You're a spy, aren't you?" He said, "No, I'm not a spy." "Yes, you are, you're a spy." Here. And the colonel flung a piece of paper in front of him and said, "There, write down, I am a spy. Go on, write it down, you're a spy." And he did. He wrote down, in his own language, "I am a spy." And the colonel said, "Go on, sign it." And he did.
When the colonel had finished, a more mild-mannered officer would continue the interrogation.
I think that's a classical technique of how you interrogate people. The idea was he bullied them, and then there was the other man who was with him, his second in command, who was a soft-spoken man and kind, and that's how it was done. You had to break somebody within, 48 hours, or they weren't going to break. It was a very quick turnover, as it were.
The suspects were told that as spies they faced the death penalty. It greatly helped to focus their minds.
I'm absolutely certain that there was never any form of physical torture used. A degree possibly of mental anxiety. The thing was to create anxiety in the man's mind. And if you were quite certain, or pretty certain, that he was a bad hat, you played on that and you gave him sleepless nights as much as you could, making one wondering what you knew about him and how you knew about him.
The Prime Minister said that agents have got to be either shot or hanged. But the intelligence bodies, MI5 and SIS, took the view that intelligence was more important than bloodletting, and that where you had suitable candidates for operation as double agents, they should be used for this purpose.
MI5 already had one man under its control, an agent with the code name Snow, who the Germans believed was working for them. But for MI5, one wasn't enough. They wanted to create a network of double agents. The Swede Gustav Karoli, an Abwehr spy, caught after arriving by parachute, was given the choice: either work for MI5 or face the death penalty. Karoli decided to cooperate. He was given the code name Summer and taken to Wormwood Scrubs, which in 1940 was used as the headquarters for MI5 and its rapidly expanding staff. Upon his arrival at Wormwood Scrubs, Karoli was asked to make radio contact with his German controllers. He was supervised by the MI5 radio operator Ronnie Reed, then on his first assignment. Shortly before his death in 1995, Reed was interviewed on home video.
We drew up outside the gates of Wormwood Scrubs. I went in, and there was a German parachutist, obviously, who had come down in a field and got blood all down his face, who said, I forget exactly what he said, but there were three other people standing around him, one of whom was a man called Colonel Whirlidge in red tabs, said, "This man is a parachutist and he is supposed to transmit tonight back to Germany. We want you to go out to a field at Cambridge and transmit and make sure he sends the message we have prepared." And that evening we got a reply from Hamburg saying message received and understood. And the chap had said in the coded message, "I'm going underground for a few days while I sort out some accommodation, but I have arrived safely."
Through summer, MI5 learned about the arrival of another German agent, the Danish national Wolf Schmidt, who parachuted into Cambridgeshire carrying a small radio transmitter. Thanks to Summer's duplicity, Schmidt was picked up soon after his arrival and taken to Camp 020 for interrogation.
How long have you been here?
Where?
In England.
In England? I have not been here now before since the 15th of July.
I believe you're telling me lies, are you?
It is true.
You have been working for the Germans, you've been trained as a wireless operator, and you were landed by parachute.
No.
Yes.
No, I have never been with the Germans.
Yes, you have.
No, absolutely no.
Now look here, my man. I know more about you than you think. You're in a very dangerous position. You're going to be shot as a spy, so you had better start telling me the truth.
I know it is dangerous, but I cannot tell you more than
Don't start telling me lies. I know all about you, so the sooner you tell me the truth, the better.
Yes. Yes.
So, come. Tell me the truth. It's the only hope you've got.
On the second day of the interrogation, Colonel Stevens succeeded in breaking Schmidt by telling him that he'd been betrayed by his old friend from the Abwehr training course, Gösta Karoli, alias Summer. Schmidt, an ardent Nazi, stopped claiming innocence and agreed to work for MI5. Schmidt was given the code name Tate and moved to a safe house near Radlett, north of London. MI5 groomed him as a major double-cross spy. 1 month after his arrest, Tate was told to send a first message to German intelligence. He explained that the delay in transmission was due to an injury incurred during his jump, but that he was now ready for duty. The question was, would the Abwehr believe his story? Amazingly, they did. In their Hamburg station, Schmidt's Abwehr controllers were elated. After the loss of so many of their agents, the German intelligence officers welcomed anyone who got through.
Ich begebe mich selbstverständlich sofort in die Auswertung.
Richtig. Dort finden Sie folgende Luftlage vor. Die Karte zur Lage im Westraum.
By now, the Nazis had all but abandoned the planned invasion of Britain. But having a spy on the other side of the channel was still considered a coup for the Abwehr officers who were in charge. Inga Haag worked in the office of the head of the German Abwehr.
It was a great success. It meant something, but it was more prestige. I am important because in my job, I do a good job. I have sent so many agents here or there, and it was more important to have an agent in Britain than an agent in Switzerland.
News of the Abwehr's success was eagerly passed on to Hitler, who before the war had been lukewarm about spying on Britain. Now the Führer was delighted, bragging to his confidants that the Nazis had an agent in London who sent up to 29 radio messages a day. Tate, like all double agents in Britain, was run by the MI5 subsection B1A. It operated from inconspicuous offices in central London. B1A's work was overseen by the highly secret 20 Committee, which represented different Whitehall departments. Its Roman numerals XX stood for Double Cross. Newly released documents of the Tate case show how the double agent was used for the purpose of deception in the war against German submarines. Through Tate's transmissions, MI5 convinced the Germans of the existence of a bogus minefield in the North Atlantic. It helped to deter U-boats pursuing Allied convoys between America and Britain. Throughout all this, the Germans were unaware not only of Tate's duplicity, but also of the fact that British intelligence had broken some of the secret codes used in the Abwehr's internal radio traffic.
By the end of 1940, we really were reading an enormous amount of what the Germans were doing and knew quite a lot about their plans. That helped enormously in running the double agents, because not only were we able to track the whole planning for the disposition and the sending over the double agents, but we were able to see when they sent back this bogus information, whether it was believed or not.
Operating from their secret premises in Bletchley Park, British codebreakers eventually managed to crack the Nazis' reputedly unbreakable Enigma machine, which was used to encode most German military radio traffic. This source of information, known as Ultra, gave the British a crucial advantage over the Abwehr.
Well, it meant everything, really, because, for one thing, when we were running double agents, we could know whether we were deceiving the enemy or not. We could also know who they were going to send. We'd probably be monitoring his training over there before he actually arrived. You know, it was as good as that.
In May 1941, the Germans sent another agent, the Czech national Karel Richter, to supply Wolf Schmidt with British currency. Was the new arrival another potential double-cross candidate? Richter desperately tried to stay in hiding, but was picked up by members of the Home Guard and sent to Camp 020. His interrogation was unusually complicated. Richter soon trapped himself in a web of inconsistencies. Joyce Hall worked at Camp 020 and took notes during Richter's interrogation.
He claimed that he had some small misdemeanor in Germany, and anyhow the police got onto him, and that he was forced to come across to spy, but according to him, he had been beaten up and told he was got to come across and do a job over here, and that until he sent back any message from this country, his wife was in their hands too. So that one felt terribly sorry for him. I felt pathetic little creature, that what would you do if your wife was being threatened? But on the other hand, one has to have the nous to say, yes, but are we sure that this wasn't the cover story that the Germans thought up for him?
Richter was taken back to the field where he had landed. These pictures were taken by MI5 at the time. Unfortunately for Richter, his arrest had been noticed by members of the public. There was the danger that the Abwehr might become aware of his internment. MI5 believed that Richter was either inept and unreliable or a master spy sent to check up on Tate. Either way, he seemed unsuitable as a double agent.
I remember being in tears quite a lot, giving the semblance of cooperating. A sort of a foolish little chap that had got embroiled in it for some reason or another, but an arch criminal, no.
Although Richter appeared to be cooperative, MI5 decided not to accept him as a double agent. Instead, they washed their hands of him, and Richter was handed over to the public prosecutor. He was tried by a jury and found guilty of espionage.
A number of agents, of course, were handed over for execution. The Treachery Act provided the death penalty for espionage and sabotage.
So these agents were just pawns in a big game, weren't
yes.
they?
And they were more or less, yes, with regret written off.
In MI5, it was rather like a game. It was, playing a game. You picked up the clues here and you picked up the clues there. It was like a treasure hunt in many ways. And then suddenly, it was an execution morning, and everything went very quiet. And you went in by yourself to get your coffee, and you sat at a separate table, and you didn't talk to anybody much. Suddenly it was real. For the first time it was real. And somebody was dying out there. I believe it does happen in prisons. They used to happen, that the prisoners used to go berserk on execution days.
Karel Richter, like 15 other German spies caught in Britain during the Second World War, was sentenced to death. His executioner later remembered that Richter began to struggle for his life when he arrived in the hanging room. It took the hangman and 4 prison warders several minutes to tie and restrain him before they could carry out the execution. As the war progressed, the German Abwehr in France took on increasing responsibility for running agents in Britain. The Abwehr chose as its headquarters in Paris a luxury hotel on the boulevard Spies.
We were put up in an old-fashioned hotel, Lutetia, which was on the left bank, and as you know in Paris, the left bank, right bank. Underground station was round the corner. We had comfortable rooms and bathrooms. It was clean, it was pleasant, it was quiet, and we had very comfortable offices, all very old-fashioned. And the whole hotel had been taken over for the military. And we were only Abwehr and Abwehr staff. You see, the social life was fascinating. The generals rather liked it, and when General Falkenhausen came from Brussels over, and one of the places in Champs-Élysées, when he came in, the band stopped and then played Je tire ma référence, a very well-known French song in those days. Wherever he went, it was played, and so on. So others too had that. We had at the Ritz our little table in the bar twice a week. We found the girls. Once you had seen it, you had seen it all.
The Abwehr was a doubtfully effective service. Its head, Admiral Canaris, was an old-style officer of the Imperial Navy, intensely patriotic, but loathed the Nazis and all they stood for, didn't really enjoy collaborating with the regime, wasn't enthusiastic about it at all. They tended to recruit people who were not enthusiastic Nazis, who were not particularly good intelligence officers. As was very, very well put by somebody, they were people who disliked Hitler but didn't want to go and fight.
But waiting in the wings was Reinhard Heydrich's SD, Nazi Germany's political intelligence service, which was part of the SS. To gain even more power in the Nazi state, Heydrich's ambition was to take over the Abwehr's foreign espionage operations. Canaris was keenly aware that Heydrich was encroaching on his territory. One way that Canaris could prove his worth to Hitler was to send more agents into Britain. An opportunity arose when the Abwehr arrested the members of an Allied intelligence network in France, Interalli, including its leader, a Polish airman stranded in Paris. Roman Chernievsky is remembered by the British under the name of Valenti, alias Brutus. While languishing in a Gestapo prison, Brutus agreed to go to Britain to spy for the Abwehr, in return for the lives of his family and fellow resistance fighters. To preserve his cover, the Abwehr staged Brutus's escape to England. Once in London, Brutus reported to the Polish government in exile. He stuck to the story of his escape. Was the Abwehr going to have a genuine agent after all?
He was very closely cross-examined by the Poles themselves, because it looked highly suspicious that a chap could escape. And then MI5 took him on, and just at the end of the interrogation, he suddenly produced a paper called The Great Game. And he explained how, in fact, the Germans had approached him to become an agent of theirs, and he had agreed, intending all the time to be to offer his services to the British and to operate to be a double agent.
MI5 decided to give Brutus the benefit of the doubt and consider him as a potential double agent. As his cover, he started to work for the Polish General Staff, which was based at the Hotel Rubens near Victoria. But newly released documents reveal MI5's continuing suspicion of Brutus. Brutus kept asking awkward questions about his status as a double-cross spy. Had Brutus, in fact, been sent as a triple agent to spy on MI5's double-cross operations? To check whether Brutus was still working for the Germans, MI5 did what it has always done in such circumstances.
Well, we had telephone checks in the office. There was a lady called Mrs. Grist who lived in the basement and always had a black dress on and keys round her waist. It was rather sinister. And we went down and listened. They bugged various people's houses that they thought might be selling down the river.
Brutus wasn't the only one whose telephone was bugged. Anyone suspected of jeopardizing the double-cross operation was a potential target, not just for phone taps.
What else would you do? Would you bug bedrooms?
Naturally. And, telephone taps, and of course you don't even have to do it via telephone. It can be done outside. I'll give you a tip. If you want to have a conversation you never want to be overheard, go in the bathroom and run the taps as loud as you can. That'll stop anything.
MI5 eventually became convinced that Brutus was genuine and started to run him as a fully fledged double agent. Brutus soon became one of its most valuable assets. The MI5 officer J.C. Masterman later remembered,
running a team of double agents is like running a club cricket side. Older players lose their form and are gradually replaced by newcomers. With our double agents, the object was always to have a thoroughly well-trained and trustworthy team, changing the personnel to the best advantage and ready always to take the field for what might be a decisive match.
One early star player was Dushko Popov, codenamed Tricycle.
Tricycle was a lovely man. He really was. He was Yugoslav. Very much a member of the aristocracy. He became very much, I should say, the pet of the office. Everybody loved him and everybody liked him. They called him Tricycle, I believe, because he liked three in a bed, but I wouldn't like to go any further into that. That's only gossip.
But the Tricycle case was not without complications. 4 years into the war, he was summoned to neutral Portugal to meet his old friend and Abwehr controller, Johann Jebsen. It emerged during the meeting that Jebsen knew of Tricycle's duplicity.
This created a new dimension to the game. Could one go on running him as a double agent? I knew that everything he was sending was being sent without approval, because they would read it in the looking glass backwards. I was rather gung-ho at that time and felt that we ought to eliminate his controller. But wiser counsel prevailed, and we didn't. But from that moment onwards, as a matter of policy, one could not use Tricycle as a deception channel. It would have been far too dangerous.
Juan Pujol was a Spaniard who began his spying career in Madrid. He later became known as Garbo.
I don't know what made Garbo tick, but he didn't like the Germans much, a lot in fact, and so he decided he'd like to be a British agent, and he came to the embassy and they told him to bugger off, roughly speaking. They weren't playing.
Having been turned down by the British, Garbo offered his services to the Abwehr in Spain instead. The Germans accepted, and Garbo decided to go to Lisbon, then the spy capital of Europe. From Lisbon, the new German agent began to write regular reports for the Abwehr in Madrid. Not on the situation in Portugal, but on conditions in Britain. For Garbo was double-crossing the Germans, fooling his controller, Karl Erich Kuhlenthal, and his fellow intelligence officers into believing that he was writing from London, and that his letters to the Abwehr were carried by a secret courier. In reality, the main sources for Garbo's reports were a handful of English reference books and a vivid imagination.
I think he had a map. I think he had an atlas. And he invented an agent, and he gave her the grandest name he could think of. He called her Lady Smith-Jones, because those were the the most English names he knew. And he managed very well, thank you very much.
The Abwehr were in fact delighted with Garbo's information.
Why the Germans believed it, I cannot imagine. I mean, some of it was such unbelievable rubbish. I mean, describing how the vineyards in Wales were suffering from the drought or the frost, or whatever it was. It's quite extraordinary.
Although Garbo continued to offer his services to the British authorities in Lisbon, he didn't come to the attention of MI5 in London until Bletchley Park picked up Abwehr signals concerning a mysterious German spy who was supposed to be operating in England.
Fortunately, MI5 discovered in conversation with SIS in Lisbon, they discovered about Garbo and the fact that he was accepted by the Germans as a viable agent. And it was decided after a good deal of argument that Garbo should be brought to this country, because if he remained in Lisbon, it was quite certain that sooner or later he'd be blown.
Garbo left Lisbon for Britain in order to work under the direct control of MI5, who would make sure that his constant flow of letters would continue. Ahead of him lay the biggest challenge of his life. By now, MI5 had moved its headquarters to Blenheim Palace near Oxford, after Wormwood Scrubs had suffered considerable bomb damage. MI5 was confident that all major German spies in Britain had been caught or were under its control. With the help of Bletchley Park and Ultra, the double agents were used increasingly for the purpose of strategic deception, to support a growing number of Allied military operations. The Allies now planned Operation Overlord, the invasion of the Normandy coast. They put in place a massive deception scheme, codenamed Fortitude, to convince the Germans that the landings would occur further east, along the Pas de Calais. In this operation, the double agents were assigned a major role.
The deception plan was brilliantly thought out. The cover plan created an imaginary army, and we gave the Germans the impression that we had available almost twice the number of troops that were in fact in existence.
Through its double agents, MI5 sent messages which suggested the existence of FUSAG, the first US Army group in the southeast of England, on standby to invade the Pas de Calais. In reality, Fusag was little more than a figment of the imagination. Yet the Germans became convinced that it was real. One of those analysing the German reactions to this deception scheme was the MI6 officer and codebreaker Hugh Trevor Roper. After the war, he also interrogated former members of the Abwehr.
I can't remember who it was, but it was an Abwehr officer who had defected and who said, you must understand that from the point of view of an Abwehr officer, it was better to send in a false report or a report from a false agent than no report at all. That it was they wanted to keep their, on the whole, comfortable jobs in the Mediterranean or in Portugal, than to go back to Germany and be transferred to the Eastern Front or something like that.
Why did the German army believe the Abwehr agents? They were not able any longer to mount overflights over the United Kingdom because they had completely lost command of the air. If they had mounted overflights, they would have seen a lot of conspicuous display of dummy tanks and dummy landing craft and dummy aircraft to back up Garbo's stories. And so, for lack of anything better, they believed the Abwehr agents, and in particular Garbo, who became almost a sort of solo player. Whereas up till the summer of 1944, there'd been an entire orchestra of deception.
Working from a small flat in central London, Garbo had convinced the Germans that he had recruited a large network of agents and sub-agents throughout Britain, who were in an ideal position to report on Allied troop movements. These non-existent agents were the brainchild of both Garbo and his ingenious case officer, Tommy Harris, an artist and painter of Anglo-Spanish descent.
All the agents were imaginary. None of them existed. And there were 7. And quite a lot of them had sub-agents. So it was a notional network. You had to remember or keep a record of where they were all supposed to have been so that they could work together and coincide. They all had their own characteristics, and some information could be sent by one agent but not by another, because it'd be the sort of thing that he would never find out or be interested in. They each had their own sphere of work. And as they weren't there at all, of course, it would be easy to get them mixed up. The agent in Liverpool was too well placed, so he had to be got rid of somehow or other. So he died, and his obituary came in the local paper. But of course he'd never been there in the first place.
The timing and the location of the Normandy landings on the 6th of June 1944 came as a surprise to the Germans. To preserve Garbo's credibility, MI5 and Garbo were allowed to send a last-minute message that warned the Germans of the imminent invasion. As it turned out, the German radio operator had switched off his receiver for the night, and Garbo's message wasn't picked up until much later in the day. On the morning of the invasion, Hitler was sleeping late at his Bavarian mountain retreat. He didn't seem particularly concerned. Even before the landings, German intelligence officers had convinced Hitler that the main Allied thrust was going to be in the Pas-de-Calais. The Germans soon picked up another message by Garbo, in which the double agent stressed that the Allies were preparing a second attack further east.
The fact of that was that we were able, up to a point, to persuade them that the Normandy landings, when they started, were a diversionary attack, that the main force was still in East Anglia, waiting to go across the Channel to Calais. And we were able to maintain that pretense for several days after D-Day, quite critical days, when the Germans could have reinforced the Normandy coast.
For weeks, as Allied armour continued to roll off the Normandy beaches, vital German reinforcements were held back east of the Seine in expectation of a second invasion. The German dictator had been successfully deceived. But before the war was over, the double agents were given one last task. A week after D-Day, the Germans started sending the new V-1 flying bombs across the Channel. Many V-1s managed to get through the air defences and hit central London with unexpected accuracy. Hugh Astor attended a meeting in Whitehall to discuss what could be done.
There was some gloom, and one of my colleagues, and I can't remember who, it certainly wasn't me, said, well, would it help if the Germans shortened their range? And the chap laughed and said, yes, of course it would help. And so we all went away, and a week later we went back, and the falls had been plotted on the map, and each day the range had decreased. And the briefing officer said, I don't know what the hell you're doing, but for God's sake, go on doing it. And of course what we were doing was reporting all the V1s which had gone too far, and we were ignoring the ones which had gone too short. So the Germans were persuaded to reduce their range. We got a tremendous rebuke from Herbert Morrison, who was then Home Secretary, I think. He was horrified that what he described as the invention of the devil should be controlled by people like us as to where it fell. But luckily, Winston and his colleagues prevailed and said, you know, well, it's going to fall somewhere. We might as well try and arrange for it to fall where it does the least damage.
Moving the targets of the flying bombs was the double agent's last big achievement before the war came to an end. Three months after VE Day, Garbo returned to Spain to meet his former Abwehr controller, Karl Erich Kuhlenthal. Close to tears, the German praised Garbo for his achievements and told him that shortly before the collapse of the Reich, Hitler had personally awarded him the Iron Cross. Kuhlenthal died in 1975 without ever finding out that he had been deceived. The British had succeeded in keeping the Germans guessing. Yet throughout the war, they had themselves been under observation.
Well, I think a lot of people in MI5 were fairly left-wing. I mean, it was a fashionable thing to be, and it was, in many ways, it was a sensible thing to be. I was pretty left-wing myself.
But the security services didn't know that there were Soviet spies at the heart of Britain's intelligence community. Kim Philby of MI6 and Anthony Blunt of MI5 were both involved in the double-cross system. Though their treachery was known to security chiefs by the 1960s, Blunt's deceit was kept secret, even from his former colleagues, until 1979.
When Anthony Simpkins told me, I said, I don't believe it. And he said, but he confessed. And it felt exactly as it once did when I was in a small earth tremor. I couldn't trust my feet on the ground. But it was absolutely devastating. It was dreadful. It's like suddenly waking up and finding you're married to Jack the Ripper or something like that.
After defeating the Nazis, the British faced the USSR in the Cold War. And the KGB proved to be a much more formidable opponent than the amateurish German Abwehr. But MI5 has yet to release its documents on this less successful period of its history.
Conspiracy, paranoia and life on a knife edge next today. The unsung heroes of war revealed in just a moment here on UK TV History.